My name is Emily Carter, and what I'm about to share with you still feels like a storm I barely survived. If you're new here, welcome to my story time. And if you've been following my channel, you know I never sugarcoat what happens in my life. This one, thought his one almost broke me. I grew up in a family where appearances mattered more than anything. From the outside, we looked like the picture of wealth and respect. My father, Robert Carter, was a powerful businessman, a man everyone in our town admired. My brother, Daniel, was always his golden child. And me? I was the one who had to learn how to survive on my own. Those words still ring in my ears. When I started this channel, I promised myself I'd use it to share real experiences, not some polished, fake version of events. So let me take you into the heart of my family drama, the betrayal that cut me to pieces, and the shocking twist that came when the judge read my grandfather's words. Trust me, you'll want to stay until the end because the truth turned everything upside down. Before I dive deep, I just want to say if you've ever felt like the forgotten one, if you've ever been pushed aside in your own family, then this story is for you. You're not alone, and sometimes life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. I'll be honest, I hesitated before telling this story. It's raw, it's painful, and it exposes the ugly side of what happens when money becomes more important than love. But it's also a story of survival, resilience, and finding out that sometimes the person you least expect to stand up for you already did, long before you even knew it. So grab a drink, get comfortable, and prepare yourself. This is not a fairy tale. It's about how my dad signed away $30 million to my brother, cut me off completely, and how, in that moment, I thought my life was destroyed. But then when all hope seemed lost, the judge opened my grandpa's final letter. And in those few lines, everything shifted. If you're curious about how that unfolded, make sure you stick around. Also, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and ring that little bell so you don't miss any of my updates. I promise, by the end of this story, you'll see why family secrets can be both poison and salvation. This is where it begins. To really understand what happened, you need to know the world I grew up in. My family wasn't just comfortable, we were the kind of family that people whispered about. My father, Robert Carter, had built a real estate empire from the ground up. At least, that's what everyone believed. Behind closed doors, the truth was a little more complicated. The Carters had wealth long before my father expanded it. That foundation came from my grandfather, William Carter. He was the one who bought land when no one else thought it was valuable, the one who poured his life into businesses that my dad later inherited. Grandpa was the kind of man who would roll up his sleeves and work alongside his employees, despite owning millions. He taught me more about humility in one summer than my father ever did in an entire lifetime. But Dada was different. He believed in appearances, in winning, in making sure the Carters looked powerful. He also believed Daniel, my older brother, was the heir to everything. From as early as I can remember, Daniel was treated like the crown prince. When he got into trouble at school, Dad brushed it off, as boys being boys. When I brought home straight A's, Dad would say, "That's expected, Emily. Nothing to celebrate." My mom, Laura, was quieter. She was the kind of woman who lived in the shadow of my father's decisions. She loved me, I could feel that, but she rarely stood up for me when Dad pushed me aside. It was as if the family rules had been set in stone, Daniel first, Emily second. And Daniel? He thrived in that environment. He wasn't cruel to me all the time, but he never missed a chance to remind me of where I stood. "Face it, Em," he once told me when we were teenagers, "Dad's gonna give me everything. You better learn to make it on your own." At the time, I laughed it off. But deep down, those words dug into me. The Carter estate was the physical reminder of all of this. A sprawling mansion on the edge of town, with marble floors, chandeliers, and a driveway so long you could get lost walking it. Every holiday, every birthday, we gathered there, and the house itself seemed to echo the hierarchy of our family. Daniel at the center, Dad's pride. Me on the sidelines, loved only when it was convenient. But there was one person who saw me differently, Grandpa. I used to sneak into his study when the parties got overwhelming. He'd always be there, sitting in his worn leather chair, a glass of bourbon in hand. He'd listen to me talk about my dreams, my fears, and he'd say things like, "Don't let them decide your worth, Em. Money doesn't make you rich, character does." I didn't realize then how much his words would matter later. When Grandpa passed away, it was like the air was sucked out of my world. He had been my safe place, the only one who reminded me that I wasn't invisible. After his funeral, I felt completely exposed. And that was when the battle over his will began. The thing about money is, it doesn't just reveal character, it magnifies it. My father became sharper, colder, more determined to cement Daniel as the heir. My mom stayed silent, and Daniel grew more arrogant with every passing day. I was told, point blank, that I should not expect much. Dad even said, "Emily, your brother has responsibilities you don't understand. You're strong enough to build your own path." It was the first time I realized that in their eyes, my worth wasn't measured by love or loyalty, it was measured by inheritance. And yet, somewhere deep down, I had this tiny flicker of faith. Because Grandpa was a man of fairness. He had promised me once, when I was 16 and crying in his study, that he'd never let me be forgotten. At the time, I thought it was just comfort. But as I would later discover, he meant every word. The tension didn't explode all at once. It built slowly, like storm clouds gathering over the horizon, until the sky turned black and the thunder rolled in. After Grandpa passed, the atmosphere in the Carter household grew colder than I'd ever known. My father buried himself in paperwork, Daniel strutted around like he was already in charge, and my mom, well, she floated quietly between us, never choosing a side. I remember one night at dinner, maybe 2 weeks after the funeral. The table was heavy with silence. The kind of silence that makes every sound, forks against plates, the clink of a glass feel like a gunshot. Daniel leaned back in his chair and said, "So, Dad, when do we finalize everything? I mean, it's not like there's much to debate. Grandpa built this empire for us. For me." He didn't even glance at me when he said it, as if I wasn't there. Dad nodded, cutting into his steak. "Soon. The paperwork is already moving. The estate, the businesses, everything will be signed over." Then his eyes flicked toward me, cold and sharp. "Emily, you need to understand that your brother will carry this family forward. That's his burden. You don't want it." I set my fork down, my appetite gone. "Burden? You're calling $30 million a burden?" Daniel smirked. "Don't be jealous, Em. You've always been independent. You'll be fine." Something inside me cracked that night. I'd grown used to being second place, but hearing them talk so openly about a raising mite was different. I excused myself from the table, locked myself in my room, and cried until my chest ached. The weeks that followed only deepened the divide. Invitations to family meetings stopped arriving in my inbox. Daniel started making decisions about properties, as if he already owned them. He even brought his fiancée, Jessica, to the estate and introduced her to staff as the future lady of the house. I overheard him one afternoon, laughing with her in the hallway. "Emily. She won't be around here much longer. Dad's got a plan for her. She'll get a little help, maybe, but she's not part of this world." I wanted to scream, to throw something, but instead I walked away. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me broken. Things came to a head one Saturday, when Dad called me into his office. The room smelled of leather and old books, the same office where Grandpa once sat me down to talk about dreams. Now it felt like a courtroom, and I was on trial. Dad didn't waste time. "Emily, I've decided to transfer the majority of assets to Daniel. The real estate holdings, the company shares, the estate. It's about $30 million in value." I froze, the words hitting me like a slap. "And me? What do I get?" "You'll be fine," he said, as if that was an answer. "You've always had a strong will. You don't need this. Money like this, it comes with responsibility. Daniel is equipped for it. You're not." My voice shook, but I refused to back down. "So you're saying I don't deserve anything? After everything I've done for this family? After all the times I supported you, took care of Mom, helped Grandpa when you were too busy?" Dad's jaw tightened. "Don't twist this. It's not personal. It's business." Daniel, who'd been lounging on the couch, let out a laugh. "Face it, sis. You're just not built for this world. But hey, maybe you'll write a book about it someday." The fury inside me boiled over. "You know what, Daniel? Maybe I will. And people will finally see you for what you are, a spoiled little prince who never earned a dime of his fortune." For a moment, his smile faltered. But then Dad's voice cut through the air. "That's enough. Both of you. Emily, leave." And I did. But not before slamming the door hard enough to make the walls shake. From that moment on, every interaction was war. Daniel flaunted his new wealth to be, buying expensive suits, hosting parties, and bragging to anyone who would listen. My father ignored me completely, as though cutting me off financially also erased me from his life. But the worst blow came when the official documents were drawn up. I received an envelope in the mail, thick with legal jargon, and at the bottom, my father's signature. Robert Carter had signed $30 million worth of assets to my brother. My name wasn't mentioned anywhere. I sat on my bed, the papers trembling in my hands, and for the first time, I truly believed I had lost everything. One night, unable to sleep, I wandered into Grandpa's old study. The room hadn't been touched since his death. His books still lined the shelves, his pipe sat on the desk, and the leather chair looked like it was waiting for him to come back. I curled up there and whispered into the darkness, "You promised me, Grandpa. You said you wouldn't let them forget me. But they already have." It was the lowest point of my life. And yet, it was also the beginning of something I couldn't have imagined. Because somewhere out there, hidden in the legal mess, in the silence of my family's betrayal, my grandfather's voice was waiting to be heard. The day of the will reading came on a rainy afternoon. The sky was grey, the kind of grey that presses down on you until it feels like the whole world is carrying your grief. My mother sat beside my father in the courthouse, her hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes cast downward. Daniel strutted in wearing a navy suit, his fiancée Jessica on his arm. He looked like he was walking into a coronation rather than a legal proceeding. I sat at the opposite end of the table, my heart pounding. I wasn't supposed to get anything. That much had been made clear. Still, I had to be there, because this wasn't just about money, it was about closure. About hearing Grandpa's final words, even if they didn't include me. The lawyer, Mr. Thompson, cleared his throat as the room settled. He was an older man, with silver hair and glasses perched low on his nose. He had been my grandfather's attorney for decades, and there was a weight in his voice as he opened the thick envelope. "William Carter's last will and testament," he began. "Dated 6 months before his passing." Daniel leaned forward, smug. Dad folded his arms, already confident. I clenched my fists under the table, bracing myself. The first sections were as expected. Grandpa left small bequests to charities, to a few long-time employees. Then came the big part. To my son, Robert Carter, Mr. Thompson read, I leave my respect for continuing the family legacy. However, I have already given him his share of guidance and opportunity. He does not require further assets from me. Dad's head jerked up. A ripple of shock went through the room. Daniel blinked, confused. Mr. Thompson continued, his voice steady. To my grandson, Daniel Carter, I leave encouragement to live wisely. As a token, I leave him $1 million. The silence was deafening. Daniel's mouth dropped open. What? 1 million. That's it. He looked at Dad, panic flashing across his face. I froze. My ears buzzed. 1 million. That wasn't even a fraction of what Daniel thought he was about to inherit. And then Mr. Thompson adjusted his glasses, pulled out a smaller, sealed envelope from the back of the will, and said words I'll never forget. To my granddaughter, Emily Carter, I leave the remainder of my estate, valued at approximately $29 million, along with the family archives and personal letters. She has shown resilience, humility, and strength, and I trust her to carry forward what I have built. For a second, I thought I had misheard him. The world went silent, the air thick. My father's face turned red, veins standing out on his neck. Daniel slammed his fist on the table. This has to be a mistake. Daniel shouted. Grandpa would never. He knew I was supposed to take over. Emily doesn't know the first thing about running a business. Mr. Thompson remained calm. Mr. Carter, these are your grandfather's words. He was very clear, and this document is legally binding. I sat there, numb. $29 million. The estate. The archives. My throat closed, tears stung my eyes, but I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. Dad finally exploded. This is absurd. My father must have been manipulated, or confused. Emily had no business with him in matters like this. Mr. Thompson's gaze hardened. I assure you, Mr. Carter, your father was of sound mind when he drafted this will. In fact, he wrote an accompanying letter to clarify his decision. With your permission, Emily, I'll read it aloud. All eyes turned to me. My voice trembled. Please read it. Mr. Thompson opened the letter and began. My dearest Emily. If you are hearing this, then I am no longer with you. I know by now your father and brother may have tried to convince you that you don't belong, that you are less than they are. But I have watched you. I've seen your heart, your determination, your kindness. I built this fortune not just for wealth, but to preserve something meaningful. Daniel has always been groomed for money, but he has never respected it. Robert has power, but he has forgotten compassion. You, Emily, you carry both strength and humility. That is why I entrust my legacy to you. Do not let them make you feel small. This is your inheritance, not just in dollars, but in responsibility. Build something better than I did. And know that I loved you deeply, more than words can say. Grandpa. By the time the letter ended, tears streamed down my face. I felt like he was in the room with me, his hand on my shoulder, reminding me I wasn't invisible. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Daniel shot up from his seat, his voice booming. This is insane. Emily doesn't deserve this. I've been preparing my whole life. She's done nothing. I finally found my voice, quiet but sharp. Done nothing. You mean besides being ignored, belittled, and told I wasn't enough? Maybe Grandpa saw something in me you never did. Dad stood too, his glare like fire. Emily, this isn't over. I won't let you destroy what I've built. Mr. Thompson raised a hand. Gentlemen, this is over. The will is clear. If you contest it, you will face a long legal battle, but I assure you it is airtight. My father stormed out, Daniel on his heels, muttering curses under his breath. Jessica looked pale, like she had walked into the wrong family entirely. And me? I stayed seated, clutching Grandpa's letter like a lifeline. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just Emily, the forgotten daughter. I was Emily Carter, the one my grandfather trusted with everything. But that was only the beginning. Because if you think my father and brother were going to accept that outcome quietly, you don't know the Carters. What came after was louder, darker, and more ruthless than I could have imagined. Over the next week, the fight moved from the courtroom to the court of public opinion and to the boardroom. Anonymous quotes appeared in the press about a daughter out of her depth. Old photos of me at 21, tipsy at a college party, materialized online. A blog accused me of weaponizing victimhood. Priya traced the IPS to an address controlled by a private PR firm that had previously worked for one of Dad's partners. Mr. Thompson sent a cease and desist. The posts stayed up anyway. The board called an emergency meeting. Technically, the board was at the operating company, not the holding company. Grandpa had left me, but reputational shocks travel fast. I arrived in a black suit I'd bought on sale after college interviews, feeling like a girl wearing her mother's clothes. Priya stood at my shoulder, whispering bullet points. In the conference room, 8 men and 1 woman watched me, as if I were a test they had not studied for. The chair cleared his throat. Ms. Carter, we appreciate you coming. There's concern about stability. I understand, I said. Stability is my concern too. A board member, an old friend of my father's, leaned back. You don't have experience running an organization of this scale. I'm not here to run it, I said. I'm here to ensure we abide by the principles that built it. The people who run it day to day will keep doing their jobs. What I won't allow is reckless leverage that jeopardizes the company's future for short-term gains. The woman on the board, a former CEO named Angela Wu, tilted her head. Where did you learn that language? In the archives, I said. In William Carter's words. Something softened in her gaze. Good answer. When the meeting ended, not everyone was convinced, but the panic had pulled back a few inches from the shore. It would come again. But I had learned how to stand. Jessica showed up at my apartment the next evening. I was surprised she knew where I lived. She stood in the doorway with mascara smudged under her eyes, twisting her engagement ring around and around. Can we talk? She asked. I let her in. She perched on the edge of the couch like a cat ready to bolt. Daniel is spiraling, she said. He thinks you're doing this to humiliate him. I'm doing it because Grandpa asked me to, I said. Because it's right. She swallowed. He's not just angry. He's scared. He made some commitments. People are calling. He's overextended. Gambling? I asked. Her silence was answer enough. I thought so, I said. He's been celebrating since he was 25 by buying chips. Her face crumpled. I thought I could help him. I thought if we got married, he'd settle. But now she's threatening to sell things that aren't his to pay people I don't want to know. Thank you for telling me, I said. But Jessica, if he comes to you asking you to do anything illegal, walk away. For your own sake. She nodded, tears spilling. I already did, she whispered, holding up her bare left hand. The ring sat on the coffee table between us. He threw it back at me. When she left, I locked the door and sank to the floor, my spine against the wood. I wanted to hate Daniel. I wanted to write him off as a villain. But somewhere under the anger, I felt something like grief. We had both been born into a game whose rules were written before we knew what a rule was. He had learned to believe entitlement was destiny. I had learned to make myself small. Neither was love. Neither was family. The next incident shattered any illusion that this would remain a clean fight. I returned to the archives 2 nights later with Priya to scan and catalogue documents we would need for depositions. The rain had cleared, moonlight lay like mercury across the floors. As we reached the door, we heard a sound inside, paper tearing, a box scraping across wood. Priya's eyes widened. She pulled out her phone and hit record. I slid the key in. The door swung open. Daniel was there, sleeves rolled up, sweat beading on his forehead. A stack of letters lay on the table, half shredded. Another box 1999 sat open, empty. "What are you doing?" My voice echoed, louder than I meant. He froze, then straightened slowly, the way a cornered animal evaluates a jump. "Cleaning up family messes," he said. "That's evidence," Priya said sharply. "You're destroying evidence." "This is my house," he snapped. "No," I said, and the word felt like a bell. "It's mine." "The room. The documents. All of it." "Step away." He looked at the phone in Priya's hand. "You can't use that," he said, but the weakness in his voice made it sound like a question. "It's more than enough to show intent," she said. "Do not take another step." His jaw worked. For a moment, I thought he would rush past us. Then all the fight seemed to collapse inside him at once. He sagged against the table and covered his face with his hands. "I'm drowning," he said. The words were muffled, small. "Dad can't fix all of it, and he won't admit how bad it is. I borrowed against everything because he told me this was all coming to me and I could do what I wanted." And then Grandpa, his hands dropped. His eyes were red. "Grandpa never believed in me." "That's not true," I said, and I heard the surprise in my own voice. "He believed in a version of you that could grow up and stop being cruel." He laughed, a sound like broken glass. "That version doesn't pay debts." Priya stepped forward. "Daniel, if you walk out now, we won't press charges for tonight. But if anything else goes missing, I will personally call the district attorney. Do you understand?" He nodded. He stumbled toward the door, then stopped and looked back at me. "He picked you," he said, and there was no venom left in it, only a bewildered ache. "He picked you and I don't know how to live with that." He left. Priya exhaled. "We need to inventory everything immediately," she said. "And change the locks." I nodded. My hands were shaking so hard I had to sit down. On the floor by the table leg, half caught under the torn paper, I saw the thin edge of a ledger. 1999. I slid it free. Inside were line items, tidy and relentless. At the back, a memo handwritten by Grandpa documenting a transfer my father had made without board approval. A note in the margin read, "If repeated, voting trust triggers." I flipped the page and found a letter from Dad to Grandpa, angry, defensive, with phrases that felt like déjà vu: optics, power, burden. Grandpa's reply was clipped to it: "If you cannot choose prudence over pride, I will choose it for you." I closed the book and pressed it to my chest. "I see it now," I whispered. "I see why." The final confrontation came in a courtroom, but not the one we'd just been in. This time it was in the judge's chamber, smaller, with shelves of legal books, and a window looking out at a line of winter-bare trees. The judge had asked to speak with counsel and parties after receiving a sealed packet from Mr. Thompson. He wouldn't tell me what was inside. We sat, me, Mr. Thompson, Priya, across from us, Dad and his lead attorney. Daniel was not present. He had another matter, the attorney said. I tried not to picture what that meant. The judge opened the packet and spread its contents on the desk, a notarized codicil, dated the same day as the will, and a letter addressed to the court, if necessary. She read silently, then looked up. Mr. Carter, she said to my father. Your father anticipated your challenge. He wrote this to me. Not to you. Not to your children. To the court. She began to read aloud. To the court. If my son contests this will, understand that he is not acting to protect the company, but to protect his image of himself as indispensable. He is not. The company was built to outlast any one ego, including mine. The inheritance to Emily is not a whim, it is a corrective. Robert has had the helm long enough to reveal his compass. He points toward storms and calls them destiny. You may be asked to weigh capacity. Weigh, too, intention. I intend that my granddaughter carry the tie to the past and the authority to say no when others say yes too quickly. I intend that my grandson learn humility before leadership. I intend that my son remember that this was a gift to him and not a crown. Respectfully, William Carter. The judge set the letter down. The room was quiet except for the ticking of a small clock on the bookcase. Dad's attorney cleared his throat. Your Honor, with respect, letters of intent cannot override statutory mechanisms. The judge held up a hand. I know what carries legal weight, Counselor. I am not ruling now. I asked you here because I wanted these words in the room. She turned to my father. Mr. Carter, your father could not have been clearer. My father stared at the letter like it was an animal he could not quite name. For the first time since this began, I saw something other than anger in his face. I saw exhaustion, a man standing at the edge of a cliff he had spent his life climbing, suddenly unsure of why he had wanted the view. Do you know what it's like, he said, very softly, to be the one who kept the doors open? To be the name everyone called when a deal went sideways. Your grandfather got to build when it was easy. I had to hold when it was hard. Mr. Thompson's voice was gentle. William held through 3 recessions, Robert. He just didn't call the reporters to watch. A muscle jumped in Dad's cheek. He looked at me. Something moved behind his eyes. Memory, maybe. A little girl bringing him coffee in a paper cup during a late night at the office. A teenager he dismissed with a wave because a call was more important than her face. A young woman he told to survive on her own. He inhaled once, sharply. I won't withdraw the contest, he said finally. I can't. I know, I said. And I did. Pride is a habit, not a posture. You do not put it down in a single motion. The judge signed another order, discovery timelines, deposition dates, a voluntary mediation session to be scheduled. We stood to leave. As we reached the door, my father said my name for the first time in weeks. Emily. I turned. He stared at me, words assembling and disassembling behind his eyes. If you do this, he said, you'll be alone. I thought of Mom crouched on the kitchen floor beside me. Of Angela Wu's shrewd, kind gaze. Of Priya's calm voice in the middle of a scream. Of Mr. Thompson's steady hand on the legal tiller. Of Jessica's bare left hand. Of Daniel shredding letters and then sagging under the weight of a choice he couldn't live with. Of Grandpa, always in his study, telling me character outlives wealth. I'm not alone, I said. I'm just not with you. He flinched, as if I'd slapped him, then looked away. Then we'll see you in court. The mediation took place in a windowless room, with beige walls, and a pot of coffee that tasted like burned dust. A retired judge shuttled between rooms, carrying offers like fragile porcelain. Dad wanted control mechanisms, veto power over certain decisions, a ceremonial role that was anything but. We offered a family council with no binding authority, regular reports, and a promise to maintain the company's philanthropic commitments for at least 5 years. He scoffed. Daniel texted me a single message from an unknown number, "Give me 10 million and I'm gone." I didn't respond. By the end of the day, we had an agreement on one thing only: we would keep the employees out of our crossfire. No layoffs for optics. No surprise restructuring to pressure the other side. It wasn't much, but it was something. 2 nights later, a brown envelope slid under my apartment door. Inside was a thumb drive. A note paperclip to it read, "He made me do it. I'm sorry. J. Jessica." I plugged the drive into my laptop and played the first file. Security footage hard to tell where, until I recognized the hall outside the archives. Daniel, talking to a man I didn't recognize, handing him cash, glancing around. Audio was faint, but clear enough. "Just get the box from 99. She can't prove anything without it." I sent it to Priya, who sent it to Mr. Thompson, who sent it to Dad's counsel with a single line, "This ends now or we involve law enforcement." They didn't end it. But they stopped the smear campaign. The blogs went quiet. The PR firm shut down the anonymous accounts. The next morning, a courier delivered a sealed envelope from the court, deposition dates, and a note that the judge had reviewed the footage in camera. In the margin, in her tight, spare hand, she had written, "Please impress upon your clients that criminal conduct will not be tolerated." I smiled for the first time in days. The last scene of that chapter unfolded back in Grandpa's study, at dusk, the room dressed in amber and dust motes. Mom stood at the window, the dying light turning her hair to copper. I sat in Grandpa's chair, the 1999 ledger open on my lap. "Do you hate me?" she asked. I looked up. "Why would I?" "For going along with your father for so long. For not protecting you when I should have. For waiting to give you the letter." I closed the book. "I think you did what you thought would keep the peace," I said. "I think peace built on silence isn't peace." She nodded, eyes shiny. "I want to help, if you'll let me. I know where the bodies are buried." "Not literally," she said quickly, and a small laugh slipped out, dry and surprised. "But I know who your father listens to when he pretends he doesn't listen to anyone. I can talk to them. I can tell them you're not here to burn the house down. I'm here to open the windows," I said. "That's all." She smiled, small and sad. "He won't understand that. But maybe I can help him try." She crossed the room and pressed a kiss to my hair, something she hadn't done since I was a child. "Your grandfather would be proud." When she left, I sat alone with the fading day, and the ticking clock and the weight of the ledger. I thought about choice, how we believe it is something we make once, with ceremony and fireworks, when in truth it's something we make again and again in quiet rooms with no witnesses. I stood and went to the desk. In the top drawer was a fountain pen with Grandpa's initials. I uncapped it, smoothed a sheet of thick paper, and began to write a letter of my own. To the employees of Carter Holdings. I wrote about stability, about stewardship, about the line we would walk between profit and responsibility. I wrote about the future not as a command, but as an invitation. I wrote, finally, about my grandfather's faith in me, and mine in them. When I finished, I felt something lift inside my chest, as if a rope had been untied. I turned off the light, closed the door, and stepped into the hallway. Daniel stood at the far end, a shadow by the staircase, watching. Our eyes met. He didn't move. Neither did I. After a moment, he nodded once, barely a movement, and walked away. I stood there in the half-dark, the old house holding its breath around me, and knew this was not the end. There were months of depositions ahead, maybe a trial. There would be more headlines, more whispers, more moments when I would wonder if I had the spine for the fight. But I also knew this: the judge had read Grandpa's words, and so had I. And once you hear the truth spoken clearly, it is very hard to unhear it. I used to think winning would feel like fireworks, loud and blinding and impossible to ignore. In reality, it began with a calendar invite that looked like any other: asset transition initial session. Location: Thompson and Field, 10th floor. Duration: 90 minutes. Priya and I rode the elevator up in silence. The doors opened onto a reception area, with soft carpets, and a wall of windows. Mr. Thompson was waiting with a tidy binder, and a thermos of tea he insisted on pouring for me like we were at his kitchen table, not a law firm. "This is the boring part," he said, smiling. "Boring is good." Boring meant signatures, checks, keys. It meant new accounts with my name on them, a list of properties that suddenly fell under my stewardship, and a cascade of responsibilities that felt both heavier and kinder than anything I had ever carried. We signed 3 hours past the scheduled 90 minutes. When we finally stood, my hand ached and my head floated, but something in me had settled the click a lock makes when it aligns with the right key. On the drive home, Priya said, "You know, you can hire an entire office to manage this for you." "I will," I said. "But I also want to understand it. Really understand it. I can't just inherit the shape of Grandpa's legacy, I have to learn the weight." She smiled. "That's exactly why he chose you." The first thing I did was move out of my apartment. It was small and familiar, and full of the old version of me, who apologized for taking up space. I packed my clothes, my books, my mismatched plates, and donated half of what I owned. When I closed the door, I touched the wood and whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for holding me while I became someone else." I didn't move back to the estate. I couldn't. The house felt like a museum to our worst habits. Instead, I bought a brick townhouse downtown with a little courtyard that caught the morning light. I painted the walls the soft white of old paper, and filled the rooms with sturdy things: oak shelves, a kitchen table big enough to gather around, a sofa you could fall asleep on by accident. On the mantel, I set Grandpa's fountain pen beside a photograph of us laughing at a barbecue, his tie crooked, my hair a mess. When the utilities were on and the last box was flattened, I invited Mom over for dinner. She arrived with flowers and a tentative smile. We cooked together simple things: roasted chicken, potatoes, green beans with lemon. Halfway through, she looked at me and said, "This is the first time I've seen you in a place that feels like you." We ate at the big table, and for once the silence between us was comfortable. When she stood to leave, she paused in the doorway, eyes shining. "He would have loved this house," she said. "I know," I said. "I can feel him here." The second thing I did was go back to school, not for a degree, not yet, but for a class. Financial statements for non-accountants. I sat in the second row, and took notes like a person who understood that knowledge is a form of courage. Twice a week, I walked past students a decade younger than me and felt no embarrassment, only gratitude that I could choose this. Between classes, I met with Angela Wu, the board member whose eyes had softened when I quoted Grandpa. She became an unofficial mentor. We drank black coffee, and she ran me through case studies like sparring sessions. Okay, she'd say, tapping a pen against her notebook. You've got a building that's 90% occupied, but half the tenants are on short-term leases. Your father wants to leverage it to buy 3 more. What do you do? Ask why, I'd say. What's the endgame? Exactly. Ask why until the truth gets tired of lying. It was the best advice anyone had given me outside of Grandpa's study. I also hired a property manager, who didn't flinch when I insisted on spending money on repairs that wouldn't make the front page of anything. We replaced the boilers in 2 older buildings, insulated attics that leaked heat like sieve, doubled the budget for elevator maintenance, and renegotiated vendor contracts with clauses that favored employees' safety over efficiency. It wasn't glamorous. No one wrote an article about the Carter heiress who cared about HVAC systems. But at the ribbon cutting for a refurbished community center on the ground floor of a building Grandpa had bought 60 years ago, an old man I didn't know squeezed my hand and said, "Your grandfather used to fix things himself when the landlord wouldn't. He'd be proud you're still fixing them." It was worth more than any headline. Not everything was smooth. Dad's legal contest didn't evaporate just because the assets moved. Depositions started in earnest long, airless days in a conference room where lawyers asked the same question 12 different ways to see if the answer would crack. I learned to breathe through it. I learned that "I don't recall" is not a failure if it's the truth, and that silence, used carefully, has a sound, the sound of a trap failing to spring. Daniel's deposition was the hardest. He wore a suit that didn't fit. He looked like someone who had slept in a chair for a week. When Mr. Thompson's colleague asked a simple question, "Did you instruct anyone to remove documents from the archive room on the evening of the 14th?" He stared at the table, then said, "I don't remember." Priya slid a still image across the table, Daniel's face tilted toward the security camera, half in shadow, unmistakable. He stared at it for a long time. When he spoke again, it was almost a whisper. "Yes." Afterward, in the hallway, he caught my arm. "You won," he said, but there was no accusation left in it, just a bewildered grief. "I don't know what to do now." "Stop losing," I said, and it came out more tender than I expected. "Call the people you owe. Tell them the truth. Sell what's yours to sell. Get a job. Ask for help from someone who isn't expecting a piece of you in return." He laughed without humor. "Sounds easy." "It won't be," I said. "But it will be cleaner." He dropped my arm and nodded, once, a tired soldier acknowledging a command. Some nights, exhaustion found me like a tide. I'd sit in my kitchen with a mug of tea and feel so worn I could almost see through myself. On those nights, I read Grandpa's letters. Not the legal ones, the human ones. Notes he wrote me when I was away at camp. A postcard from a trade show in Chicago, where he'd drawn a little cartoon of himself next to a skyscraper. The letter Mom had hidden and then given me, edges softened by her guilt. One evening, I opened the 1999 ledger again and found something I'd missed, a small, folded sheet tucked into the back cover. It was a list in Grandpa's hand. Not numbers. Names. Employees who had been with the company since the 70s and 80s, some of whom had retired, some of whom had passed away. Next to each, small notes. Ruth loaned her car when the delivery truck broke down. Ed stayed late to fix a broken lock so tenants could sleep. Marta brought soup when your grandmother was sick. At the bottom, a line, "Remember why." I taped that line inside my closet door, where I would see it every morning. It was my compass when numbers tried to masquerade as the map. If the quiet work built my new life, the loud moment that announced it came from an unexpected place, my channel. I hadn't uploaded anything since the will reading video. Then one afternoon, hands still dusty from unpacking books, I filmed a simple update in my kitchen, no makeup, hair in a messy bun, sunlight pooling on the counter. I didn't talk about numbers. I talked about responsibility. About learning to run toward the things I didn't understand. About being chosen and choosing back, every day. I used to think inheritance was a finish line, I said to the camera. Now I think it's a starting pistol. The sound is scary, but it means you're in the race. I posted it and turned off my phone. When I turned it back on that evening, the video had hundreds of thousands of views. The comments were a river. People told me their own stories of being the forgotten child, of standing up to fathers who loved crowns more than handshakes, of learning to breathe when the world tried to stand on their chest. I read until my eyes hurt. I cried until my insides felt wrung out and clean. I didn't answer all of them. I answered enough to remind myself that stories are bridges you can cross both ways. With Mr. Thompson's blessing, I also set up the Carter Apprenticeship Fund, seeded with a slice of my first year's distributions. We designed it for the kids who didn't have a clean path to college: electricians, plumbers, HVAC techs, carpenters. The people who fix things you only notice when they break. I named the first cohort the William class. At the small launch event, I stood behind a podium my legs could barely see over and said, "My grandfather believed character outlives wealth. I think skill outlives both." The press wrote about that, but the stories that mattered were quieter. A text from a single mom whose son had been accepted, he hasn't stopped smiling in 2 days, or a handwritten letter from a man in his 50s who finally finished his electrical certification after dropping out at 20 because life got in the way. "Thank you for seeing me," he wrote. "No one has in a long time." Through all of it, Dad stayed at the far edge of my life like a storm that might or might not break. He didn't attend the fund launch. He didn't respond to my letter asking for a truce meeting: no lawyers, no posturing. When we saw each other in depositions, he acted as if we'd never shared a house, a dinner table, a name. Then, 3 months after the asset transfer, he called. I almost didn't answer. When I did, he said, "I'm outside." I looked through the front window. He stood on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, hair grayer than it had been, shoulders set like he was holding up something heavy that no one could see. I opened the door. He didn't move to cross the threshold. "I came to see where you live," he said. "I don't know why." "You can come in," I said. He stepped inside cautiously, like the floor might judge him. He looked around the living room, the books, the photograph of Grandpa and me. His eyes lingered on the fountain pen. "He loved that pen," he said. "He did," I said. He said the weight made him write more carefully. We sat at the table. I poured coffee. For a long time we didn't speak. Then he said, "They tell me the fund is a good idea." "I didn't start it because they would tell you that," I said. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. It vanished. "I don't know how to talk to you," he said finally. "Every time I try, I hear myself saying something you'll hate me for later." "You could start with 'I'm sorry,'" I said, not unkindly. "That's something I wouldn't hate you for." He stared into his cup. "I'm sorry," he said. The words were quiet and ungainly in his mouth, like a language learned late. "I thought pretending you didn't need anything would make you strong." "It just made me lonely," I said. He closed his eyes briefly. "I didn't mean to make you lonely." "I know." He opened his eyes and looked at me the way a person looks at a horizon they once sailed past without noticing the line between sky and water, simple and astonishing. "I'm not withdrawing the contest," he said, and I braced without meaning to. "But I'll tell my counsel to stop dragging you through mud that isn't there." And I'll tell Daniel to stop whatever he's doing to make things worse. I can do that much. It would help, I said. Thank you. He stood. I should go. At the door, he hesitated. I'm not the villain you think I am, he said, but his voice was thinner than pride. I'm just a man who was afraid of being small. We all are, I said. The difference is what we do with the fear. After he left, I stood in the hallway and cried, not from pain, not exactly, but from the ache of a world that refused to be simple. He was right, he wasn't a villain. He was a man who built a life out of appearing tall in rooms that measured height with strange rulers. I could hate the damage without hating the man. It would take practice. Most things worth learning do. Spring came like a benediction. The courtyard trees leafed out, bright as promises. I planted herbs in pots, basil, rosemary, mint, and took to working on the back steps with my laptop and a glass of iced tea. The company numbers stabilized. A troubling variance in one property's maintenance budget turned out to be a billing error, not theft, and the new head of facilities fixed it within a week. The apprentices in the William class sent selfies in hard hats and texted me questions about tool brands with the urgency of surgeons choosing scalpels. One Saturday, I hosted a small dinner, Mom, Angela, Mr. Thompson and his wife, Priya, and the property manager, Lewis, who could coax a furnace into purring with a screwdriver and a prayer. We ate outside at a table crowded with candles and mismatched plates. The conversation wove in and out stories about rough days and easy wins, about old mistakes and new grace. At some point, I realized I felt safe. Not because I had won a fortune or a fight, but because I had found people I didn't have to pretend with. Because my life fit me, and I fit it. After everyone left, I washed the dishes slowly, hands in warm water, night breeze lifting the curtains. I thought of the girl who'd sat on the kitchen floor with her back against a cabinet, stomach roiling from headlines. I wanted to tell her, hold on. The hardest part is not the fight. The hardest part is believing you're allowed to win it. The next morning, a letter arrived with no return address. Inside was a single sentence on plain paper. I started over. Thank you for forcing me to. D. I stood in the doorway and let the sun find my face. Somewhere, my brother was choosing to be someone else. I didn't know if he'd succeed. I didn't know if he'd fail. I only knew he was trying, and that was a kind of inheritance, to the kind that doesn't pass through courts. When the court date finally came for the next phase, motions and more motions, I walked into the courthouse not as the forgotten daughter, not as the girl told to survive on her own, but as the woman who had learned that survival is only the first chapter. Building is the second. Blessing, maybe, is the third. As I took my seat, I thought I heard Grandpa's voice the way you hear a favorite song when a stranger hums 3 notes on a sidewalk. Remember why? I did. And I would. The court battles dragged on for months, but something shifted after spring. My father's attorneys stopped filing smear-laced motions. Daniel stopped trying to sabotage me through the press. The fight didn't end, it softened, like a storm that had finally tired itself out. One afternoon, Mom invited me to lunch at a quiet cafe near the river. When I arrived, I was surprised to see both her and Daniel already seated. My brother looked thinner, his face drawn but calmer than I'd seen in years. Emily, he said as I sat down. Thanks for coming. I folded my hands around the coffee cup the waiter placed in front of me. Of course. What's this about? He hesitated. For once, there was no smirk, no arrogance. Just a man trying to gather words. I'm in a program now. Gambling counseling. Debt restructuring. It's not easy. But I'm doing it. I nodded slowly. That's good, Daniel. He looked at me directly. I blamed you for everything. For Grandpa's decision, for Dad's disappointment, for my own mistakes. But it wasn't you. It was me. And I'm sorry. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I had imagined this apology 1,000 times, but now that it was here, it felt fragile, like porcelain I was afraid to drop. I appreciate that, I said finally. I can't forget everything, but I can forgive. His shoulders slumped in relief. Mom smiled, tears in her eyes. This is all I wanted, she whispered. For us to sit at a table and not be enemies. We ate slowly, talking about ordinary things: the weather, a new cafe opening, the town's summer festival. It felt almost normal. When we parted, Daniel hugged me. It wasn't long, but it was real. A week later, Dad called. His voice was tired, the edge worn down. Emily, I've been thinking. About what your grandfather wanted. About what I wanted. Maybe they weren't the same thing. I held the phone tightly. No, they weren't. He sighed. I can't promise I'll ever see this the way you do. But I don't want to spend the rest of my life fighting you. Your mother's right, we've lost enough. For the first time, I heard vulnerability in his tone. Not defeat, but acceptance. So what does that mean? I asked. It means I'll let it go. The contest. The appeals. I'm done. I closed my eyes, tears stinging. Thank you. A pause, then softer. You're stronger than I gave you credit for. I see that now. It wasn't a full reconciliation. But it was the beginning of peace. And sometimes, that's enough. That summer, we held a gathering at the community center that Grandpa had once helped fund. Families came, kids played in the courtyard, and the William-class apprentices showed off projects they'd been working on. Mom was there, chatting with neighbors. Daniel came too, quieter, more reserved, but present. And then, to my surprise, Dad walked in. The room went still for a moment, whispers rippling. But then he shook hands with Louis, greeted Angela Wu respectfully, and even thanked Priya for keeping my daughter steady. Later, I found him standing alone by a display of old photographs of Grandpa. He touched one lightly, the one of Grandpa at his first construction site, sleeves rolled, dirt on his boots. He was tougher than both of us, Dad said without looking at me. Maybe, I said. But he also knew when to listen. That's what made him different. For the first time in a long while, Dad smiled, faint but genuine. Maybe I'm learning. We stood there together, side by side, not reconciled entirely but no longer enemies. Just two Carters, staring at the man who had shaped us both in different ways. The night ended with laughter in the courtyard, music drifting from a small band, and kids chasing each other through the grass. As I watched, I realized the war had not given me what I thought I wanted. It hadn't given me victory in the way of trophies or headlines. What it had given me was space to breathe, to grow, to heal, and maybe, just maybe, to forgive. Grandpa had been right. Character outlives wealth. And sometimes, forgiveness outlives anger. When I locked up the community center that night, Daniel called after me. Hey, Em. I turned. He smiled, tired but hopeful. See you next week. I smiled back. Yeah. Next week. And for the first time, I believed it. Looking back now, I realize this story was never just about money. $30 million might sound like the center of it, but it wasn't. The real inheritance wasn't numbers in a bank account, or deeds to properties. It was the lessons hidden between the cracks of betrayal and forgiveness. I learned that family can wound you deeper than anyone else, but it can also teach you how strong you are when you finally decide to stand. I learned that being cut off doesn't mean being erased. Sometimes it means being forced to grow roots where you never thought you could. And I learned that the words of someone who truly believed in you, like my grandfather's letter, can echo louder than years of being overlooked. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: your worth is not defined by what someone else withholds from you. It's defined by what you choose to build, even when you're told you have nothing. Money fades, power shifts, but character, what you do when no one is watching, lasts. So, thank you for listening, for walking with me through the mess and the miracle of this journey. If my grandfather's faith in me taught me to stand, then your presence here reminds me that sharing our stories can help others stand too. If this resonated with you, if you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or told to make it on your own, I hope you know you're not alone. Drop a comment below and tell me your story. I read every single one, and your words matter. Don't forget to like this video if it moved you, subscribe for more story times, and hit the bell so you won't miss the next chapter. Because trust me, there's always another chapter. Until then, remember Grandpa's words: character outlives wealth. And sometimes, the greatest inheritance is simply the courage to keep going.